It's Monday. Joe Lindsley is with us. He's in Ukraine since the very beginning of this Russian aggression against Ukraine. Great to see you again, Joe.
MIchał, hello from Kharkiv, just 30 miles from Russia.
Joe is traveling. He is connecting with us sometimes from Lviv, which is close to the Polish border. Now he's 30 kilometers from Russia. Joe, we've just showed some footage of the Kharkiv attacked by the Russian rockets. There are a couple of days or a couple of weeks of relative calm in the cities of Ukraine if we compare it to the things that were going on in the cities far from the front line in the first months of this war. So let's start with this before we move to the things that are going on in US regarding this global war that we are discussing here. What do you make of it? What's the reason for which there are no attacks of the scale that we've seen 2 months ago, 3 months ago? What's your assessment of the reasons behind it?
I think if we look at the precise dates, we can shed a lot more light on what might be happening. You know, here in Kharkiv, and I know I'm aware of this every minute that I'm here, Russian missiles hit before the air raid alarm sounds. So that's a pretty scary thing. And I've been here on many scary days, especially scary nights. Lately, it's been very windy, and the debris from ruined buildings and the glass is blowing all over the city. But largely, the city's clean. It's coming back to life. And it's been this time of calm and quiet from Russian rockets. The last time there was a Russian attack on the city of Kharkiv was October 6th. And what happened the next day was Hamas's invasion of Israel. On October 5th, the Russians hit a little village outside of Kharkiv. They destroyed almost an entire village, entire families with a precision attack, very much like Hamas's attack in the Negev desert. They destroyed a funeral party and attacked an entire village. And the next day, they hit Kharkiv city center. But since Hamas's attack on Israel, Russia has been fairly quiet. Moreover, fairly quiet even on cities near the front lines. I mean, there are always attacks. There were attacks on Odessa region last night, but there have been no major attacks on the center of cities generally since Hamas attacked Israel. And then the other key point is that since September 22nd, when Ukraine attacked in a very dramatic way Russia's Black Sea Naval Fleet headquarters in Sevastopol in occupied Crimea, since then, there have been no major nationwide Russian missile attacks upon Ukraine. Everyone was expecting, and this has totally disappeared from the headlines, but everyone was expecting that Russia was going to start in early October, really a month ago, its wintertime infrastructure attacks on Ukraine. And so far, that has not happened. And we do have to ask the question, what would the global headlines be right now had Hamas not attacked Israel? They would have to be saying Russia has yet to respond in a dramatic way to Ukraine's significant blows upon Russia's naval fleet, and then the way Ukraine used the ATACMS provided by the United States to hit a Russian air base in Berdyansk. And so Ukraine has been having these actually incredible successes. And I think we see, as we see with Israel, when the evil guys, so when Hamas and Russia, when the bad guys are all of a sudden suffering a bit, we start to hear calls for ceasefire. You know, no one was calling for ceasefire when Hamas was slaughtering Israeli families in the Negev desert and throughout Ukraine on October 7th. But now we hear calls for ceasefire when Israel is actually at a point to move toward victory. And in a similar way, for example, in the South China Morning Post, I think it was yesterday, any media in China that's in Hong Kong is controlled by the government. Now we start to see calls for ceasefire, in Ukraine, and you look at it, people are saying this is a stalemate. It's not. Ukraine is not only holding the line, but Ukraine is actually caused massive destruction to the Russian Black Sea naval fleet, and without any major repercussion from Russia. And what this should show the world is that now is the time to move very swiftly and move for victory. But instead, everyone is distracted. And that's why we know that Russia and Hamas and Iran are working together.
Yeah, we
so
know
do
it.
have to ask the
We know it
questions.
not only
Yep.
not only because we can assess the support, the obvious intelligence support that Hamas had to receive from someone, which is pretty awkward because of the close relations, traditional relations of Russia with Israel. We know it. We've seen it. There are millions of people with the Russian roots living in Israel. That makes just the situation more complex. We do have, and I just quoted words that I actually haven't read when they were spoken out. Alexander Litvinenko, in last months of his life in 2006, was interviewed by the British media and was asked a question regarding one of the terrorist attacks in London. And he said that as long as Russian secret services and Russia as a terrorist state will not be condemned, the world terror will never stop because, he claims, Lubyanka, which is the headquarters of KGB, of FSB, is the world center of terrorism. And he backed it with the information that we already know. Those people who are interested in the history of secret services know that the Islam terrorist had its bases in Russia, in the former communist countries, like in Poland, but not only Poland, Romania, and many other states, Germany, Eastern Germany as well, Moscow itself. My question is, Hamas was conferring with Russians last week in Moscow, and the official info was that they were talking about the humanitarian aid. What do you make of it based on things that very important politicians from U.S. say? We just quoted the new Speaker of the House. What do you make of it?
Well, for example, when you quoted the new Speaker of the House, Mr. Johnson, he said, we're going to focus on Israel first, and then we'll deal with Ukraine later because Israel is pressing and urgent. And when you speak like that, you are immediately becoming a pawn, a puppet of Hamas, Russia, and Iran. And, without even considering the fact that these things might be connected, not even considering the fact, simply saying, oh, well, the butterfly is flying over here, so I'm running over in this direction. That's exactly what we're doing. And, I've really been thinking a lot of I woke up the other day during an error alarm at 4 o'clock in the morning here in Kharkiv. There was a beautiful full moon. And I thought of those words of Charles Dickens from The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. And what we see is, this is exactly what I see here. Here in Ukraine, there's moral clarity. For example, this is I would wager it is it might be the only country in the world besides Israel where there are no pro-Hamas demonstrations. None. In every other European country, in every American state, almost every American state, there are pro-Hamas demonstrations. There is zero here because here everyone sees what this is about. They see that, on almost every night, Iranian drones terrorize Ukraine, and Ukrainians see that Israel is for all of its problems, is a pluralistic, free society. Muslims can be free there. Muslims can be in the government, Jews and Christians. It's the same here in Ukraine. The societies are very different, but they're very free. And Russia and Hamas and Iran are allies, along with China. There is moral clarity here. But in Washington, where people claim to speak with such moral clarity, they so easily become the puppets because in our moral frenzy, in our collapsed discourse, we can't step back and say, maybe this is more complicated than it seems. To our minds, in our American way of left and right.
But I do not believe that people who are in the position of power in the global superpower, which is US, do not understand it. I mean, there are tons of books, there are tons of articles about it. Experts are vocal on the interconnection and the relations between China, Russia, Iran, and the other states that were called, as we discussed last week, the new axis of evil. People should understand it, and I'm sure that they do understand it. So what's the reason for those claims?
I don't think that they do understand it. And I know it, when I was protege to the chairman of Fox News, you would think, we had access to all this information. We had money and power and access to information. And I knew so little about the world then at the corporate tower on Avenue of the Americas because we were isolated and we believe our advisors. At the extreme example of that is, Vladimir Putin. When was the last time he had a real conversation? But it also applies to many powerful people in Washington, in the West, that we're isolated and don't have correct information. And so, for example, this is why, I think it was yesterday, Tucker Carlson is once again saying, he said on X that Ukraine is oppressing Christians and Christianity is being oppressed in Ukraine. And this is what Russian propaganda does so well. It turns the truth totally on its head. It's the same thing that Hamas is doing with Israel. So actually, it's Ukraine is, and I've been, especially Western Ukraine, where people kept their religious traditions despite the Soviet hell. I'd say it is the most Christian and religious part of Europe. It's tolerant, but also traditional.
Let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you just for a second to give just another information that may be not available for our viewers outside Eastern Europe. The Russian Orthodox Church is effectively a part of Russian secret services, KGB and FSB. And I'm not talking about some assumptions. It's obvious. If you Google the name of head of the Russian Orthodox Church, you'll find those information right away. And I'm sure Tucker Carlson can find those information as well and may understand what is the meaning of the Russian Orthodox Church in a history of oppression against Christians. For example, Christians in my country, in Poland. Soviet KGB, Soviet FSB was keeping priests in Poland, in prison. They were organizing an assassination attempt against John Paul II, which is obvious. Those are the information that everyone who deals with international politics has. Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, no, and that's exactly the point. And for example, I see it here. Right now I'm in Kharkiv, a city that is Russian speaking because Ukrainian was illegal. This city was controlled by Russians for most of the 20th century, really. Now, I mean, it's fiercely free and independent, but they're in the process of recovering their traditions. People are not religious here like they are in Western Ukraine because the Soviets destroyed it. Anywhere where there's Russian Orthodoxy as a dominant religion, you do not have common religion among the people. It's only the institution. Because it's not a real thing. It was created by Stalin, recreated by Stalin as an arm of the KGB. And when I go to Western Ukraine, and this is what Tucker and they gleefully miss this point. And forget about Tucker, but there's genuine people in America who's this information trickles into their minds and they don't see the reality. But if you go to Western Ukraine, it is like religion is part of life, and it's not in our American polemical way. It's actually, I mean, if Americans saw the real Ukraine that Russia is trying to erase, you have a tolerant society, a free society. By the way, here in Kharkiv, the streets are totally clean, even after a missile attack, and they don't have to threaten to cane people to keep them clean. People have responsibility. It's actually a lovely place to live that they built, much like Israel, a free, lovely society that people who do not know how to live, like the Hamas terrorist and anyone who votes for them, or the Russians and the Russians who support the Kremlin, which is the nation, they don't know how to live. And so they seek to destroy. And that really, Hamas and Russia, as we look at the horrible shooting that happened in America, which is so common, Russia and Hamas are the school shooters of nations. They're miserable. They've not been able, and they've not invested in building up something nice and livable. And so they have to go destroy it for everyone else. And that's what I see here in Ukraine every single day. I spend lots of time in Israel. That's what I saw there. And so this gets fundamentally missed. But when I talk with Americans who are smart, sort of conservative Americans who you think would love this country if they knew it, the first thing they say is, oh, we're so tired of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I understand. I ran away from that world of neocons. They were my mentors after university because I rejected those wars. I realized that there was something morally was missing from our posture there. And so this is totally different. This is a country that is already free, that actually is an example. And every American I know who comes to Ukraine says they wish that they could bring some of Ukraine back to America, how people know how to communicate and cooperate with each other, because we so much lost that in our country. And so this is what Russia's trying to erase. Really one of the last bastions of Western civilization and of genuinely free people who can't be controlled.
Joe, I got one more question. The question regarding the situation that we do have in Europe in general. There is a kind of broad support, I would say, to Ukrainian cause in European Union right now. But on the other hand, the level of the support is not that high as we may expect, and we still remember the years of pro-Russian policies of Germany. And we do have another aspect of this global war against the Western civilization, which is a terror, which are the terrorist attacks on one hand, and the migration flow on the other hand. And I'm asking this question because the migration flow is also one of the fundamental political issues in the United States right now. We often hear that we shouldn't care about Ukraine, for example, because we have to protect our border with Mexico. We have to protect our cities. For example, attacked by fentanyl, which we are going to discuss on our program on Thursday with expert on this issue. Those things are also part of the same global game against US and against Western civilization.
Well, and I think here's where we need soul searching in America, because is it really true that all of our American problems are from outside threats and not from our inability to know our neighbors and to communicate with each other in a civilized way? And this is why I think the lesson of how Ukrainian democracy functions, especially in the wartime, is something to show the world. You know, if you look at, what we have with Hamas and Israel, with Ukraine and Russia, we have extreme examples of the freest people versus the most totalitarian people. And most of the world is somewhere in between. And everyone has to decide in this moment, which direction do you want to go? If you look at Donetsk, which was has been occupied by the Russians since 2014, it's very much like Gaza. It's a miserable place. Anyone who is a free-minded person got out of there. It was a thriving city. Now it's a hellhole. It's tyrannical. There's no freedom. And it's the same with Gaza, because it's controlled by people who hate the idea of liberty, hate the idea of actual civilized religion and society. And so here's where, you know, when we're in America, like I think we're talking about the border crisis and all that, but that has nothing to do, for example, why someone's going to go shoot, tons of people in Maine. We have to really look at the soul of our nation. And this is the question I think that Ukraine poses to the world. What Ukraine did in the 2014 Revolution of Dignity, if individual Ukrainians of all different ages had not stood in the streets and demanded, hey, we want a different type of society, Ukraine today would be Belarus, and the whole world would be in some kind of darkness with very few joyful democratic beacons of liberty. And Ukrainians, because of that stand, showed the world, just as Americans did a very long time ago, very imperfectly in 1776, still having slavery, but Americans tried to show the world. As Poles showed the world with solidarity in the breakup of the Soviet Union, Ukrainians showed in 2014. And so this is the best appeal I think you can make to the Americans. If you really want to fix America, you have to know for sure the problems are not simply from the outside. We need to reawaken our identity. And by the way, by helping Ukraine, as you see, Ukrainians are doing the fighting. You simply have to provide the resources. But if Ukraine is erased, the problem will spread, because Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe. Russia would have control of it. But more than that, the last real bastion of civilized society and genuine democracy, uncontrolled by outside forces at the moment, will be erased. And that's what this is about.
Joe Lindsley, all of our viewers can support Ukraine cause on Joe Lindsley's website. 30 seconds, Joe, for you to say
UkrainianFreedomNews.com. You can follow us YouTube, Spotify, everywhere else. And we're always trying to get supplies to the guys at the front line, UkrainianFreedomNews.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Joe, thank you for your presence. We see each other on Monday. This program comes back tomorrow by that time.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important, that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?